Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ weekly webinar. We're so glad you've joined us. This weekend on Saturday, the United States of America will mark 250 years since its Declaration of Independence in 1776. It's a big moment for my home country of America. But as we look at this, I just felt to do a teaching this week on the prophetic calling and destiny of America. We've had 250 years of history now to look at that original calling of America, setting it apart as unique among the nations, and where is it headed. And right now, as we look at this, as America celebrates its 250th birthday, there's sort of a cloud hanging over it because of the prolonged war here in the Middle East. Of course, Israel's been fighting this for 2.5, almost 3 years now, and the United States got involved by attacking Iran in June of last year, and now again in last day of February this year. And it's a war that just, they're trying to get a ceasefire, President Trump, but it's kind of a cloud hanging over his presidency because it's unpopular. There's a majority of Americans who really don't want us involved in forever wars here in the Middle East. And also we have in the U.S. an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism in America. There were in the 1930s, the late 30s, as the Nazi menace rose in Europe, a lot of Germans living in America who supported the Nazis. Charles Lindbergh was their leader. They held big rallies in the New York area, in Madison Square Garden with the swastika. It was very troubling, but they never really carried the day. But today, the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that has hit the whole world and really unprecedented in the United States. We just had the mayor, the elected mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, saying that AIPAC, the mainly American Jewish lobby for Israel, he called them monsters, and this is just the wrong, it's pouring fuel on the fire for him to do this, but for him to be so anti-Semitic and so anti-Israel and still get elected in New York City, even many American Jews voting for him, but it's an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism that I just feel this 250th anniversary is kind of clouded by this. But what we want to look at today is, as we look back at America's founding 250 years ago, what is the calling and destiny of America? Many Christians in America ask, weren't we founded as a Christian nation, and shouldn't we go back to this? And also many of us ask, where is the United States in Bible prophecy? I want to try and answer a few of these questions as we go through it, but I just, for many of you, what I'm presenting today, it's part civics lesson, part biblical teaching, prophetic teaching, that for some I think it may be new, but for others who have followed some of my teachings, especially my book, Floodgates, on God's covenant with Noah, America, its calling and destiny are really tied in to this covenant that God made with Noah and with all mankind, and we'll find out some interesting things. I'm sure you'll hopefully be inspired by it. As we look at the founding of America, there's no doubt that the culture and society of that time, it was predominantly Christian. It was steeped in the Bible. The Bible shaped the colonies more than any other book or factor, and Western civilization itself and our democratic freedoms. Many say they were built on Greco-Roman traditions. We have a U.S. Senate because Rome had a Senate, but actually they're built on Judeo-Christian values and biblical history, biblical inspiration. For instance, the Ten Commandments and all the commandments given to Israel as a nation, God at Sinai gave them like a constitution constitution for how the nation would be ruled. Israel had gone from the calling of Abraham and his family to a clan, to a tribe, to 12 tribes, and now they're a whole nation going back to the promised land. And God was setting up this principle that there is always a higher law than man himself. No one ruler governing over a people should be a law unto himself. This was the Roman Senate. They did whatever they want. They changed the rules of the game along the way. But the whole concept of constitutional republics or democracies today, where you have a constitution that is the law of the land and it's higher than any one individual, and all, even the president or whoever, your king, have to be subject to it. The British in the Magna Carta started moving that way, but the inspiration and the origin of this concept is not in Greece or Rome, but it is in the Bible and with the Jewish people. The Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, where they declared independence and they rang the bell and it cracked, it's called the Liberty Bell because they had already put engraved on the bell this verse from Leviticus 25:10, proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. And this of course, it's a biblical verse that's tied to the Jubilee year, where everything was returned to its former owner. Slaves or indentured servants were set free. And, it's this, America really has this fierce liberty and independence about it. And this is inspired by the Bible itself, where in the Exodus, the Jewish people were slaves and God set them free from their Egyptian taskmasters. Even the separation of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the U.S. government, it doesn't come from Greece or Rome, it comes from the Bible. In Isaiah 33, verse 22, it says, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." And it's only God himself who can fulfill all three roles as judge, lawgiver, and king, as the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive, because he's the only one we can trust, all-knowing, all-wise, all-benevolent, that you can't trust any one person. And so we separated these powers out, gave a certain balance between them. This is inspired by Scripture. And we'd note well here that all of these things have come to us through Israel. I tell you, the anti-Semitism today, accusing Jews of all sorts of outlandish lies and slanders, people need to appreciate all that we receive from Israel, all that we receive from the Jewish people, even our Western freedoms, our democratic freedoms and rights, and our system of government was inspired by what God gave to Israel, and what Christians then took all around the world. This is where we call it Judeo-Christian values. And we can see this even in the Declaration of Independence signed by John Hancock and all the other representatives there in that Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776. And in the recitals, when we first look at this, the opening words, there's something almost poetic about it. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. First of all, we see separate and equal station in life. America was rejecting any nobility of title of nobility. We're not going to have a king and royals and people who get treated above others and look down on others, sort of class systems like the British had, but we're all equal. And this is comes to us through the laws of nature and nature's God. They are assuming and affirming. This is the founders of our country acknowledging the existence of God and his natural laws over it. It's from Psalm 19 called Natural Theology, that the heavens declare his handiwork, that all of nature and all around us, the laws of nature, other things, tell us and testify that we have a creator God, a designer God. And this was something we didn't get from the Greeks or the Romans. We got it from the Bible, and it's right in the Declaration of Independence. And then these powerful words. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It means you don't have to prove them. The society and culture at the time accepted these biblical truths and never questioned it. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's liberty again in the Declaration of Independence, but this principle that all men are created equal, they say it is evident everywhere. It's in God's nature and in the laws of nature that we're all created equal and given by our Creator certain rights as individuals, our democratic freedoms and all. They tie this back to biblical principles and the revelation of the Bible as man being a special creation of God. And so we really need to look at this. This is embedded by the founding fathers. They, not all of them profess Jesus as their Savior, but some of them, like Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they were what we were called deists. They believed there was a creator God. He made the world. He was like a watchmaker, set it all in motion, that he didn't interfere necessarily in the daily affairs of men, but he was watching, and one day we would all give an account for our lives. That's basically deism. So there were Christians and deists who believed in the one creator God of the Bible, and they were saying that the founding principle of America was that all men were created equal. This is from Genesis, of course, in the creation story in Genesis chapter 1. But it's God speaking within the Trinity to himself, the Father to the Son, or within the heavenly council. He says, let us make man in our image. But there's no record there where God said this directly to man. Genesis 9, verse 6, in God's covenant with Noah after the flood. This is the first place in the Bible where God reveals to man this notion, trying to help him remember and never forget that man is a special creation of God made in his image. In Latin, it's called imago Dei. And this is where we get the notion that all men are created equal in his sight. God is no respecter of persons. If you do right, you will be rewarded. If you do wrong, you will pay the consequences. It's all up to you. You have that equal chance before God to walk uprightly before him. And that every life, if we're a special creation made in his image, every single human life has dignity and worth and deserves respect. And he gave us part of being made in the image of God. Does it mean, he has eyes and a nose and a mouth like us? We think in physical terms, but really the heart of this concept of imago Dei, made in the image of God, is that you and I have a will, a free will, just as God does. We are beings with our own volitional will, and moral agency, the ability to choose between right and wrong. This really separates us from the animal kingdom and is the really core reason why we're made in His image. But we have that ability to do, have our own volition, our own will, and to choose right between right or wrong. But be aware, be warned, you will give account for your life one day, your moral choices in your life. This is in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, where God says, verse 5 or 6 there, where it says, I will require a reckoning of all men. It's a prohibition on murder there. God is telling after the flood, you can eat anything, you can eat animals, just don't eat live flesh with its blood, meaning don't kill an animal and eat it while it's still alive, while its blood is still warm. Don't be like the animals. You should respect yourself. You're made in the image of God. Clean your food, cook it, however you eat it. Don't be like the animals. Have some respect for yourself, but you will require, he says, don't murder, but, and this is where it says, God will require a reckoning, an account from every single person. This is an important biblical principle that applies to everyone who's ever been born, whether you believe in God or not. This applies to you. So you have a covenant with God, or He made a covenant with all mankind, whether you know it or not, that the seasons would continue to go on as long as we hold a high view of ourselves as a special creation of God. And because you believe you're going to have to stand before your Maker one day and tell Him what you did in your life, this gives people a sense that God is watching, and it gives us an incentive to always do right. If there's something sitting there that I could steal and no one's around and I might take it, but my conscience and that sense I'd have to give account that God sees all things, you don't steal something. And this is sets a high moral standard in society when we all look at each other as created in God's image, deserving respect. I shouldn't kill, I shouldn't steal from them, I shouldn't covet anything from them. All those things in the Ten Commandments, it was all sort of embedded in what God is saying here in Genesis 9. And this is what the founders of America really emphasized in their Declaration of Independence, that all men are equal, created by God, given certain rights. It's taken straight from the Bible. It was in 1787, like 11 years later, that the people came together and in order to form a more perfect union, to move from a confederation where the states had more power around one federal government, that our Constitution was rewritten, and the U.S. Constitution, which has been such a powerful and enduring document, and it set out the legislative, the judicial, the executive branches, the separation of powers. And in the last part of it, once they had signed it, they said, we need to add a Bill of Rights, that unless the powers enumerated here are actually spelled out, the federal government has no power. It's all reserved for the people and the states. But we also want to protect individual rights, even from the states and from the federal government. And so the First Amendment has the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. And it says that basically in America, there would be no established religion. You're not going to have one denomination or church or other as the official religion, but you cannot abridge or limit and restrict faith religion, no abridgment of religion. So America was founded largely by a Christian people, and all these documents reflect that faith and belief and assume it and declare it, but it was not necessarily created as a Christian nation. It's just that faith in America is allowed in the public square. It's allowed to influence the government. But even Jesus said, render under Caesar that which is Caesar's, and that render under God that which is God's. So even he made that sort of separation. Faith is precious. It cannot be imposed on anyone. We cannot declare the U.S. is officially, you have to, like some talk about an oath of office, you have to be a Christian to serve. No, but faith is allowed in the public square. It's allowed to influence morally the decisions of our government. We have full right and freedom as Christians to influence our society and influence and speak to our government. This is different than the American Revolution at that time was different than the French Revolution in France, in Europe, which came out of that at about the same time. They really divorced faith from the public square, even throughout Europe in so many places. If you start talking about the Bible or your faith, they say it doesn't belong in government, get it out of here, and it's really chilling. They chill the voice and restrict the voice of Christians and others of faith, but in America it is allowed, and I think this is important for us to understand. However, in our U.S. Constitution, we did not really respect what we declared in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. The Constitution, in the part setting up the U.S. Congress, has what's called the 3/5 clause, in which for the purposes of allocating seats in the House of Representatives, which is by population, that the slaves, they cannot vote. The black slaves in the South could not vote. They were not considered equal persons, but in order to get the southern states to join the Union, the United States, they said, we will count the black slaves in your areas as 3/5 of the person in order to allocate the seats in the House of Representatives. This was a compromise, even by the North, on the evil institution of slavery, and we violated that principle of the equality of man, even in our Constitution. And they kept compromising up until the Civil War, when the North decided, we're going to abolish slavery in this country, and the South said, no, we're just going to leave. So they started seceding, and Abraham Lincoln became this president, leading a nation, trying to hold it together over the principle whether man was truly created equal and whether America would stand by that principle. And in a great battle of that war, probably the most pivotal battle in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a few months after the battle, Abraham Lincoln went there to deliver what's called the Gettysburg Address in the fall of 1863, and to dedicate a ceremony to the dead soldiers buried there. And he gave this really famous Gettysburg Address. He said, men won't remember for very long what we say here, but guess what? We still talk about it to this day. And as we look at what he said there, it's really interesting. Lincoln is a towering figure in American history. He still remains, in my eyes, our most incredible president. And he said, he starts out again almost poetically, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, there's our freedoms, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I think there's creation, means creator. There is a God who created, we're equal, and this is what America was founded on and dedicated to. If you want to talk about the calling and prophetic destiny of America, I would say it's wrapped around that principle. It was being tested in the Civil War over the evil institution of slavery. And Lincoln boiled down that whole war to this. He said, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, meaning America, or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition all men are created equal, whether that nation can long endure. And we really have to hand it to Abraham Lincoln. He grew up with the Bible. It was the most influential book in America, and from the founding of America. This is 80 years later, still influential. He was raised as a Calvinist, meaning predestination. His mother really drilled that in him. As he became adult, he dabbled with sort of the other end of the theological spectrum in what's called universalism, that there's no hell, all get saved, all make it to heaven, everyone's equal, you make it into heaven. He also read about Darwinism. This was a new theory, scientific theory, that refuted that man is a special creation of God, made in his image, that we actually come from the animals. He rejected that. And even though Lincoln never openly professed Christ as a savior, he did believe in the hand of providence of God over the nation. He was always honest when he quoted from Scripture in all his speeches. What made him famous was his speech about, can a house divided itself stand? A house divided itself against itself cannot stand. This shot him to national prominence and put him on the path to the presidency. Whenever he cited the Bible, he was such an honest man that he was telling you, I draw strength, I draw faith and belief. I'm not just quoting this as a platitude or to give you what you want to hear. He believed the Bible was an inspiration and revelation for man. He was probably our most intellectual president, along with Thomas Jefferson. He wrote all his speeches, probably the last president to write every one of his own speeches, including the Gettysburg Address, and struggling with the war there in the White House, isolated even within his own cabinet, opposition wanting to end the war. There was a whole peace movement in the North, riots in New York City to end the war, let the South go its own way. But as a man of prayer, he struggled with it, and I believe you see it in the Gettysburg Address. He concluded that God was testing and judging America, both sides, North and South, in our Civil War in the 1860s over our compromise on the sin of slavery. And he still believed that America was called to be a guardian, a safeguard of the principle of the equality of man made by our Creator. And as we look at the history since then, he was already, looking at Darwinism. In my research for the book Floodgates, I got really fascinated with Lincoln because he comes along just after Darwin publishes his Origin of Species, presents his theory that man evolves from animals. We're not a special creation of God. All those Judeo-Christian values, all that biblical inspiration that served as the foundation of America's founding and of Western democracy, it was under assault by this scientific pretext, this scientific theory that was used as a pretext to walk away from God or any moral accountability to Him. And they were being undermined and lost to a scientific, just a theory that said we came from animals, and it's a direct refutation of that principle of imago Dei in Genesis chapter 9. And we live even today, almost 200 years later, in societies and cultures that Darwinism has already had such a big impact that the world changed so much even before we were born. It was accepted in by the mainstream. It's taught in our schools and universities. You can't really talk about God anymore. Even in India, where they have 1 million gods, if you go to university there, you're going to be taught Darwinism, and God is thrown out of the classroom. But I would say when we look at, even world history over the last 150, 200 years, say since the American Civil War, where America paid a price and committed itself more deeply to that principle that all men are created equal, it's undermined by Darwinism. It starts there, the undermining of our Judeo-Christian values and traditions. And without Darwinism, I would say, which denies the Creator, Marxism could have never taken over a deeply religious, Orthodox Christian Russia like it did when the Bolsheviks came along in the 1917 revolution. Russia was a deeply religious nation, believed in God. It was a largely Christian nation. How could atheistic communism, atheistic Marxism come along and take over that country so swiftly? I tell you, it was because people believed this scientific lie, used it as a pretext to walk away from God and say, we are the judges of right and wrong, and we don't have to give account to anyone but ourselves. And then we faced, decades of the Cold War that thankfully President Reagan helped deliver us really through economic competition where the Soviets couldn't keep up. I would say the same thing about the pagan Nazis in Germany. How they would have never been able to take over a deeply religious Germany, the land of the Reformation, if they had not started teaching and accepting Darwinism, which gave them an excuse to say, oh, there is no God. Even though today Darwinism is being proven by science itself, positive mutation to higher forms of life is impossible because of genetic entropy, the breakdown of our DNA strands. As it multiplies, as cells divide, it breaks down both within our own bodies and what we pass on to the next generation, that it is not positive random mutation to a higher species. We are actually, the human race is degenerating, and this is proven by science itself today. There's no time to go into it all, but even though science itself is saying we have a designer, this is what really is the conclusion, that man is like, we program computers and all, that the amount of information even in one human cell is so massive and so intense, only a designer could have programmed us that way. But we've seen people accept Darwinism, as shaky as it is. They'll never give it up because it means they'd have to come back under accountability to God. They won't do it. But even it was able to take over Germany, and the Nazis justified their extermination of the over 6 million Jews in Europe based on Darwinian principles, that the Jews were an inferior race. We had to prevent them, they had to prevent them from intermingling and marrying and with the superior Aryan race, and the only way to do this, to prevent it, is to wipe out the Jews. That is a horrible sin built on a scientific pretext that is being proven wrong. And we need to restore Judeo-Christian values in this concept of imago Dei, man as a special creation made in God's image, created by Him. It is in America's founding documents. I believe it was what we were called to do in the earth as a nation. But instead, because of Darwinism, because of Marxism and all these other ideologies that do away with God and say we're the masters and the rulers of a material world, there is no God. What we have now is an era of totalitarianism and the radical left, which is now collaborating with radical Islam and to seek to destroy Israel and undermine the West and all our democratic freedoms and values. I tell you, if you want to know what the future will be like under that sort of system, just look at China. They have over 1 billion cameras all over their country, a communist regime that wants to control the people instead of God watching you. The state is watching your every move. If you're late for work, if you jaywalk in the street, you do something wrong, you will get demerits. You'll have to give account to the state for your every action. This is replacing God with the state. And this is where the world would be headed if America wasn't helping really stand as a last vanguard against it. And we have to remind ourselves, especially in this red-green alliance between radical Islam and the radical socialist left, that it was the Kremlin itself that birthed the whole anti-Zionism movement when Israel, at its founding in 1948, deliberately, consciously chose to become a Western-style democracy. They had hoped that with so many Russian Jewish immigrants into a young Israel at its birth, that it would become part of the Soviet bloc, of the Bolshevik bloc. But Israel became a Western-style democracy, and the Kremlin has been making them pay ever since by painting Zionism, the nationalist movement of the Jews to return to their ancient ancestral homeland, as some sort of evil colonial movement. This is a lie dreamed up in the Kremlin. And the Muslim world has joined this cause despite the atheism of the left. They don't care about it. Their hatred of Israel and the Jews is such that they'll get in bed with the left even though they're atheists. And now they're even being joined as we mark 250 years of America. Very shockingly, even on the alt-right, there are malevolent voices like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and others who are really demonizing the Jews, demonizing Israel, and joining to, I tell you, some of the viewers and the jump in viewers for some of these bloggers, these on the alt-right, some of their viewers are people on the left who are tuning in to hear what the latest conspiracy theories and lies that they're giving. Let's go to a conclusion. I believe that America was called to be the guardian of that core biblical principle, imago Dei, taken from God's covenant in Genesis 9, which again is a covenant with all men, the covenant with Abraham and Moses and David, and the new covenant. This was with Israel and those of biblical faith. It's salvation. The Noahide covenant is about God saying the seasons will go along, the turning of the seasons, summer, winter, seed time, harvest. It will all continue. I won't destroy the earth again so long as you follow this principle that man is a special creation of God, made in His image, made equal, but you have moral agency, but you'll give account for your life. This was what America was called to safeguard and defend. And as we look at the last 100 years or so of world history, America was able to defeat atheistic Soviet communism and Nazi socialism and push back those threats to our freedoms and Western values, our Judeo-Christian values, and thank God for it. We have to remember we got these from Israel. It is right that America stands with Israel even in this hour against Iran. Don't cut the battle short. Let's finally get rid of that evil regime. But I just want to wind up and say the prophetic calling and destiny of America is to safeguard biblical faith and freedoms as presented in God's covenant with Noah, Genesis 9, verses 3 through 6, that America has been guarding those. What I'm doing is looking back at history, our founding documents, and how it has played out over the last generations, over the last 250 years, that America was called and is destined to safeguard those biblical faith and freedom and principles until God is ready to judge the world again. And surely it will happen. Jesus says, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. There will come a time when God has to come judge the earth because we are in violation of the covenant with Noah. It's not by water, this time, but by fire. And this is, it might not be the conclusion everyone thought about, but I believe America has a calling and destiny to really stand by those principles, just as is in our Declaration of Independence and as our greatest president to date, Abraham Lincoln, enunciated in his short remarks in the Gettysburg Address, that our nation of America, and I hope others around the world appreciate this, we were conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And the question is, how long can that nation that was created by God with that divine inspiration of our founders, how long will it endure? We need to pass the torch of our biblical values and traditions to the next generation, ensure America safeguards these freedoms. I tell you, without them, the communists or other evil forces, the Chinese, they would have already taken over the world. It's not to be proud and beat my chest as an American. It is to tell you what the Bible says, what our founding documents say, and what we see down over the last 250 years, how God has used our nation. May He continue to do that. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have a great 4th of July. We're going to have a big cookout with the Christian Embassy staff here in Jerusalem. It's something that even people in other nations who value freedom and all, do something, eat a hot dog or an American hamburger on the 4th of July. And we appreciate your prayers for America and also in the role that it serves in helping to guard Israel's rebirth and existence here in the Middle East today. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us today. Join us again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow